Hello and welcome back to another episode of Tash Teaches. I'm Tash, and in today's video I'd like to share with you 14 more tips and tricks for Bitwig. Some of these have been around since previous versions, but in an interest of keeping everything nice and up to date, here are 14 things that you can do in Bitwig 5. So without further ado, let's jump right in and I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes when working in the grid, you may have one output port going to a variety of places. In this occasion, I've got this pitches module, I've got this triggers module, this 16th note triggers module, and you can see that this one output port is being sent to a variety of locations. If I wanted to now change that this won't be the thing driving our pitch, but this will, I could of course go in and manually replace every single one of these cables like some sort of peasant. But if you try and drag out from here, you'll notice you're just going to create another output port. Anywhere in the grid, if you'd like to move a cable, if you double click and drag, you can actually change the output to a completely different place. So in this case, if I had this pattern playing and I would in fact like for this LFO to be driving my pitch information, double click and drag, and voila. Maybe I'd also like to take this 12/16 Euclidean rhythm rather than this 16th pattern. So I'm going to drag with a double click and there we go. Sometimes you're performing a sort of grid patch, and while you're trying to make subtle adjustments to the parameters on the devices themselves, at this point you have no interest in moving things or, God forbid, unplugging something. So there's a rather nifty little feature up here in this padlock icon, which is the lock modules mode. When you do that, not only do you prevent yourself from being able to move things around or unplug stuff, but it also hides that background blueprint sort of grid lines, which can be very pleasing on the eyes if you're creating generative patch videos. This then allows you, if you were to be performing live, to be a lot more heavy-handed with clicking things, knowing full well that you're not actually going to undo any of your hard work in creating the patch, but you are still free to then perform with it live. If you try and duplicate an object by pressing Command or Control D, if there's something in the way of it, it will push downwards until there's a free space. If I did it with actually something that was, that had space, it would be fairly easy. But anytime you try and duplicate a thing that's blocked, it will just push downwards. If you don't want for it to just automatically decide where it's going to go, I would recommend copying instead. And when you copy, if you were to press paste, Command or Control V, it's going to paste it in the same place as where your other thing is, and it's going to push it to the right. So there's one other step to this, which is that, say I want to have one over here, all you do is click. And wherever you've clicked and you press paste, that's where it's going to do it. So I could paste it here, here, and here, and here. The only thing to note, of course, is that it keeps the cables attached to it. So that can sometimes be a little irritating. Sometimes during the process of working on a song, you might like to make a few notes or write down a few comments for yourself, whether this is things to work on the next time you get some time to sit down and work on music, or just general housekeeping of being able to just track some of the decisions you've made. Bitwig allows you to, in the clip view, if you go over here to the far right, open up this comment section. So I could say, for example, that the bass, find a better bass patch. And you can create as much text as you want. It's scrollable. So this is a really neat little way of keeping track of things. You can similarly do it with channels themselves by clicking here, and then you can access your comments. But if you'd like to be able to see them all, you've got that toggle window there. Let's say, for example, that you'd like to take some of these scenes. I've got right here an intro scene, I've got a drop 1 scene, and a drop 2 scene. If I wanted to add a bit more information to this scene, well, I could go in and I could type a bunch of shit here in the comment and then hope that I would be able to scroll here to keep it. But you've also got a comment section for scenes. So if I wanted to say, well, this drop 1, it would be handy if you bring up the reverb at the end, and I want to remind myself of that for a live performance. I can go over here and I can say, bring up reverb to transition to next scene. Very nice. Now, Obviously, if I were to add a bunch of comments into these different scenes and I could say add delay or whatever it is that I want to, I can't necessarily see all of the text of those scenes unless I click through them here. Like I could, where if I opened this up, I was able to see all of the individual track comments. This is where the project panel, which is this little sheet of paper down here, if we open this up and we go from settings to sections, you can now see that we have here in the launcher the ability to see all of these individual scenes. So if I called this, drop 12, you can see that now we have the name drop 12 there. I can also now click this little comment window here, which brings up the text-based, or the text comment input of all of them. So instead of then having to skip through, I can see with this open that, oh, well, drop 1 is telling me that it would be quite a good idea. And similarly, if this has a bunch of text, it will show it all. You really can have a lot of text here to remind yourself of stuff. This works exactly the same with if you have, instead of scenes, arranger cues, so like cue markers on here. If you were to want to add a bit of information to this cue point here, you could, of course, add the name here and say work on bass. But we can go down here as well, and if I toggle those closed, we can add them for these cue markers. So if I were to click on the cue marker, I could type in here and say drop 1. We need to fix the vocal, whatever. I can then actually see all of the things that I would need to do in these different sections. So again, you can either access the comments in the inspector panel or you can see all of them at once. So drop 2, turn down the clap. Now I can see when I come into work specifically what I need to do on this section, specifically what I need to do on this section. I can just hide it away if I don't want to see it. Oftentimes as well, we might forget what a key command is, and while we could press Command, comma, or if we're a real pleb, we could go up here and click this, and we could go to our shortcuts, and we could type it in up here. How do I scale it by 200%? Oh, cool, okay, that's my shortcut I've enabled. One other thing that we can do in any given situation is by pressing Control-Enter, we can bring up the Commander window. So say I wanted to scale this and I wasn't just going to do it the conventional way of using my key command, but say there's some sort of thing that I'd like to be able to do, but I don't want to have to go to the shortcuts window. I can press Control-Enter and I can search for it, scale. Ah, there we go. And I don't have to use my mouse at all. I can just press Enter and I can press down and Enter. So you can get quite quick with this if you know specifically what it is that you want to do, and you don't necessarily want to have key commands set up for everything. You'd like to remember the name of what you're doing rather than some sort of obscure combination of keys. You may or may not already know, but I offer private one-to-one tuition. You can book a lesson in with me on Ableton, Bitwig, or perhaps on some creative mindset coaching via the link in my description, calendly.com/tashteaches. We may quite often end up with a synth that looks like this, with a ton of modulation, and whenever we open up this modulator window, we're just faced with utter chaos. Sometimes we might want to be able to move a lot of these things, and if I were to click and press Command, I can do that, and I can drag them, or God forbid we be the kind of person who move them individually. One thing that you can do is, if you press Option or Alt, I believe, on the PC, it will change it into a sort of cursor tool that allows you to just drag and move your modulators. So you can make broad sweeps of decisions and moving things around. And this, of course, you can remove them as well. So if I just want to move those, I can. This definitely helps save a lot of time when you have a large amount of modulators. When we're modulating things, let's take this smooth moving random that I have mapped to the low pass. We used to have to either press Escape to get out of the modulation window, to move the parameter, then go back. If we wanted to make any adjustments basically to the actual positioning of the thing that we were modulating, we would have had to escape from it. Now there's a very nice little trick that they've added, which is if you hold Option or Alt on your PC, you can momentarily go back to control just the parameter itself. This can be very handy when you're trying to find the correct value not just for the modulation, but for the parameter to be upon which the modulation should take place. So Alt, you can just move it around, and as soon as you let go of Alt, you go back to your modulation window. We can either press Escape or click the handle to get out of it. But yeah, lovely little addition. We all know about using modulators on devices. Of course, if I add a reverb or add any form of thing, even a third-party VST, I can just click the modulator handle in order to be able to modulate things, yada, yada, yada. But with Bitwig 5, we now have the ability to not just modulate devices, but we also have the ability to modulate tracks. And say, what would have in the past, we would have had to put everything in a group. We can now modulate multiple devices on the same track from this window. We also have the ability to modulate multiple things across the whole project file from the project level view. But one thing that might go overlooked is that if something is in a group, you also then have access not just to the track view or the project view, but you then also have a grouped view. So let's call this synths. You can now see that I have here the ability to modulate multiple things across everything in this group. Now you may say, well, why wouldn't I just do that on project level? Why wouldn't I just make a macro on here, and then this macro can control obviously the volume on here and on here? And the reason why I would say is because you might want to keep everything quite organized. You might want to say, well, because this knob is only dealing with things within this group, well, I'm going to keep it within this group. Of course, that doesn't stop you from at a later stage creating a sort of project remote page here where then you can add things that are specific to the group. You know, I could now add this, whatever I called that. Let's call this cats. Now I have the ability on my, my main project remote control to access things smaller. But this just means that as I step through my project file, particularly in a live setting, if I have here then a bass channel, if I have the modulation window open, then that means that I'm seeing things that pertain to the group below. And I don't need to then see all of the devices, and I don't need to get all confused by everything in here. I'm literally just seeing the modulations that I've set up for the group. Similarly, I can make remote control pages here, and then these remote pages can deal with doing multiple things to multiple things within this group, which is just incredibly efficient. And then, of course, at a project level, you can have even further control of then taking, say, the ability to show a variety of things on a variety of these groups, but then still having that simplified view as you step through the project file, I think is invaluable. We've always been able to MIDI map or key map the starting of scenes. Let's say I wanted to make the intro pressing the 1 key, drop 1, 2, drop 2, the 3 key, and the breakdown drop 4. If I'm playing, I can now trigger different scenes with my number pad. But what's a rather cool new feature, specifically for live performance, is that we now have the ability to, among other things, I think that the ability to go up and down is fairly useful. But we have the ability now to trigger the next scene. So whatever is playing, play the next scene. If we bring up the MIDI mapping parameters here, you can see that it's hidden unless we're in MIDI mapping. I could now say, well, let's make the right square bracket be next scene, and let's make the left square bracket play the previous scene. So now this means, if I go back and I clearly deleted some scenes, I can now, if I were playing the intro, by pressing my right square bracket, I can skip to the next scene, skip to the next scene, skip to the next. Maybe if I press it 3 times very quickly, I can get back to the intro. So this is also great because in any view that you're in, wherever you are in the project file during your live performance, you know that you can just get to the next or the previous by pressing the corresponding key that you have set up. This doesn't have to be even a key on your keyboard. This could be on a MIDI controller. If you have 2 buttons that you'd like to use to be able to say, yo, step to the next scene. You've also got the ability down here to select a different scene. I don't find this as useful, but this means that if I was, say, highlighted on this, I can skip between which one I'm interested in putting my focus on. Similar to when we were looking at the ability to add captions and comments, it's important to note that you can also trigger your scenes by double-clicking them here. This might be useful if you have some sort of window open during your live performance where you're looking at this edit view, but you'd like to be able to skip to the next scene without having to close anything. Well, you can just double click, and whatever your view is, whatever you're looking at, you have the ability to skip through them. Similarly, you can also skip in the timeline. Let's get out of this edit view. If I was actually just in my timeline view, I can just skip around by double clicking. In a live situation, we might want to be able to modulate various parameters on various channels. And without having to then go in and see, okay, well on this tom, let's say, for example, I'd like to have, on this group channel, let's say I have a macro here that does some sort of, it makes everything longer. So we've got this device and it makes that longer, and it also adds, I don't know, a delay. Super cool, very nice. This is now a thing, you know, effects. If I want to view where that knob is in relation to the knob that I have on my kick channel, and let's say this does that and that and that, or whatever, it doesn't really matter what we're doing, I would sort of have to skip back and forth between them, because maybe this knob is up. If I'm on the tom view, I can't actually see where that other knob is. So that's where this fantastic new show track remotes feature is. If we whip this up, you then have the ability to press plus, and you can pick, first and foremost, you can actually pick how many if you right click on it. Let's say I just want to have the ability to view 2 for each channel. On here I can now click this, and I'm now able to pick whatever it is that I want to do. Maybe I had a button here as well. I could enable the button. So I can set up a bunch of different controls that, again, even if I have everything hidden, I can then see and control them. Let's also do it on the tom. Let's add the plus. We'll do this. Maybe I've got some sort of, I've got another buttons here, and I want for this to be that button. Nice. Again, now this means that I have the ability to view multiple things at once, which can be very efficient if you have a MIDI controller and you've got a variety of knobs, but you don't really know where, you don't really remember what it is that your knobs are doing. What's cool here, of course, is it means that you can see that if this is called reverb, and on here we've got this thing called pitch, you can see on all of your channels all of these things that you've set up, which means that past a certain point you don't need to have your device view open. You've already ahead of time mapped out all of the controls that you'd like to be able to have, up to 8, I believe, on any channel. Everything can be hidden. You don't need it anymore. Now you can just visually see all of the controls you want here. Also, when you've created a bunch of project-wide modulation, so again, let's say that we take some sort of macro knob, and this takes out the kick, and it takes out the clap, and maybe it increases a fucking huge reverb on this instrument. Let's utilize that trick, Alt, to drag it back down. With this knob up full, we start to really increase this reverb. Maybe I'd like to be able to now have a project remote controls that we have this knob. This is our breakdown knob. Very nice. And we've also now got this. This is my side chain. Maybe I want to have the ability to turn my side chaining on and off. So this is off and this is on. I can now close all of this up, and like I just said in the previous thing, maybe we don't want to have the ability, we don't want to see the device view anymore. But if we close that, then we actually close all of the project level modulation as well, which is why when we open up this project panel view, we can now see the remotes. We can see the project remotes here. So everything can be hidden, and we can still have access to a variety of page level modulation. Bitwig has a very strange way of exporting MIDI. If I wanted to just export this MIDI bassline here, I would go up to File and Export MIDI, but the resulting file that it would export contains the MIDI of everything in the project file. Very strange, and definitely not what you want when you are just trying to export a single stem from a project file with hundreds of MIDI clips. The quickest solution I found to this is to just make a new project file, and in that new project file you can drag whatever channel it is that you want. You don't necessarily even need to drag it with the device itself, you just need the MIDI clip. But the key is you don't activate the audio engine. We can still keep this guy as it is, but this is going to serve as our project file upon where in which we can export the entirety of the MIDI, and the entirety of the MIDI is all that we want. So you don't need to activate the audio engine to export MIDI, at which point if we just call this baseline and then we do it to our desktop, you'll see that the actual MIDI that now gets exported is exclusively the file that we wanted rather than exporting everything. I've spoken about in previous videos, sometimes the audio engine lags, and I've recommended changing temporarily the driver model to jack, or on a PC just changing this off of core audio, and this will crash the audio engine temporarily until you whip it up again. But I find a quicker approach is to just right click on this sort of transport sec. Well folks, that's sadly all we have time for today, but I do hope that this video has been useful. If you enjoyed it, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe, and click that notification bell too in order to keep up to date with all of my future videos. In the meantime, happy Thursday and happy creating!